the timeline / chronological order of Crash games. I'm going to put that in at the start. I think everything's set. Hi, it's me. Big Crash fan here, super excited. Just dropped the Crash 4 trailer. Now before this came out, I was going to do a video discussing the canon, the timeline of Crash, because, you know, it's kind of non-existent. Everyone says the racing games are spin-offs, whatever. I don't really believe that. And now this new game's coming out talking about there's going to be different timelines and universes and stuff, and I feel kind of like an idiot because had I made this video beforehand, I would have been able to say, yeah, I kind of predicted that. That's a bad way to start it, but yeah, I'm going to discuss the Crash timeline today, the way that I think the events sort of unfolded in order to keep every single game, even like these ones, somehow they fit into the canon of Crash, because, you know, that's very important for these sort of platforming games. Without further ado, I bring you the Crash Bandicoot timeline. We have Crash Bandicoot in the 90s. It starts it off, you know, there's old mate Cortex, g'day. There's his twin, his tag team look, I like it. And he builds this bloke. He doesn't build him. He mutates Crash to you know, rule the world with the help of Embryo. I didn't print out Embryo because he's not one of the more pivotal characters in this series. So, in our Crash 1, Crash, you know, he goes through the Wumpa Islands and he takes down a bunch of bosses, and, you know, if you find all the gems, you can leave the tower riding a bird with Torna without destroying Cortex Castle. However, in Crash 2, it opens up from the ending of Crash 1, the ending that you get if you do not collect the gems. So I think we can safely say that canonically, Crash did not collect the gems in Crash 1. Now that's very important. That comes into it a lot later. So Crash has beaten all the levels and bosses without getting the gems. He has taken down Cortex, who, you know, he crashes his blimp. He blows it up and Cortex falls. And then we move on to Crash 2, knowing that Crash did not collect the gems in Crash 1. That is super important. So Cortex has found the Master Crystal, and he needs the Slave Crystals, and he's going to trick Crash into collecting them for him, while Embryo tricks Crash into collecting gems for him. And Embryo needs a certain amount of gems to take down Cortex. Now, in this game, the secret ending is actually the proper ending, because the start of Crash 3 opens up with the Cortex Vortex, the Cortex Space Station. What's it? It's still up there. What does she call it? I think it's the
Cortex Vortex
is blown up at the end, the canonical end of Crash 2, because we know it's canon because Crash 3 opens up following straight from that. Which means in Crash 2, Crash did collect all of the gems. But the gems earlier on have not been collected. All gems collected, no gems collected. We move on to Crash 3 now. You know, now we're introducing something very important called time travel and Uka Uka. Very important elements. Oh, damn it. Forgot. Coco gets introduced in Crash 2. Obviously, she's incredibly pivotal to all of this. She's here with the crew. And we also get to meet Uka Uka, who's been running scenes from behind, and Entropy, the Master of Time. Now, this game is all about time travel. Entropy has that time twister machine that Crash, Aku Aku, and Coco utilize in order to find the crystals scattered across time. In this game, there's two endings. If you collect all the gems, old mate, Tropy, Uka, and Cortex get sent back in time or to another planet, wherever, to run away. But the thing is, the very next game, which is Crash Team Racing, which I strongly believe is canonical to the game, it takes place next, and Cortex, Uka, Tropy, you know, they're just chilling. Which, to me, means that the canon ending of Crash 3 is actually when you don't collect all the gems. Cortex, you know, he falls over and he's like, he needs to take a break, and Uka Uka's like, oh, they haven't collected the gems yet. I can't do the voice. Yeah, and the thing is, even if you did collect all the gems, right, the gems haven't been collected in Crash 1. That is super important. You don't have all of the gems. You did for Brio because he only needed X amount, but to defeat Uka Uka, You can get the gems across time, but what about the gems you missed in Crash 1? That is super important, and that comes back later. Keep that in mind. This whole time, you got to keep in mind that Crash did not get the gems in the first game. Okay, cool? Cool. So, Uka and Cortex are defeated, and they threaten to come back eventually, but they're not sent back in time. Not yet. Right now, that hasn't happened. We now move on to CTR. Okay, and all these guys are coming with us. I cut these out. They're kind of fun little things. They're just, you follow their adventure. Crash Team Racing happens, and Crash and Cortex, they have beef, but now there's a bigger issue. Oxide's come down. He's gonna turn the globe into a concrete parking lot. Crazy, I know. All of these guys, well, not really tropey because he just sort of shows up in time trials. All of them have to work together to figure out who the fastest racer is to stop Oxide. Cool. That's fine. That's fine. The next event that occurs, the next game, I think that canonically, I mean, with hindsight and stuff, you can look at it however you want, but I think that the next canonical Crash game, the Huge Adventure or XS, depending on where you grew up, I think it may be called something different. We'll just call it the Huge Adventure because that's the one I printed. Uka, Cortex, all the main guys move along. Cortex shrinks the world. Crash beats him. They escape an escape pod in a little escape pod, which to me sort of links to the opening of the Wrath of Cortex, where they start off in space. So I feel like it makes sense to think that the Huge Adventure was before Wrath of Cortex. Like, if you're looking at this, I know the game's all released not in the order that I'm saying, but I'm saying it's kind of like, imagine this is like an Avengers situation. Some games release at different points or whatever. Next up, we have Wrath of Cortex. Now, I ran out of ink when I was printing this one, but I think it's representative of the game itself because, it's a pretty half-baked game. In this game, we're introduced to this big guy called Crunch, who's bad Bandicoot that Cortex made to replace Crash. The whole game is about beating Crunch, beating Cortex, getting a bunch of gems and crystals, all in virtual reality or something. It's a weird game. The canonical ending for this game is the secret ending, where you get all of the gems in the virtual space. They're different kind of gems, I guess. It ends with Cortex and Uka being frozen. Not being frozen. They're in like the ice caps and they're running each other around. And Twinsanity opens up with them frozen in ice. So it's fair to assume that this game leads directly into Twinsanity. So I'm just gonna, I haven't really thought this out. We're gonna go like that. And then bump. Now we have Twinsanity, which is probably the best post Naughty Dog PS2 game they made. Cortex and Uka melt down, and the evil twins want to take over the world. And this game introduces something important as well, like different dimensions. We have the 10th dimension, the dimension they start off in. God, I've forgotten which one it is. But that comes into play later for some, not any major things, but just for things to canonically make sense. So, in this game, we still have all these guys. They're all trotting along on the journey. I like moving these guys around. This is really fun. I want to do more videos like this. They're trotting along on their little journey. And funnily enough, Spyro's in this game. It's kind of like a side gag. He sort of comes in at the end and he burns Entropy for trying to steal a bunch of his gems that were stolen by the evil twins, who have been crossing dimensions, like stealing things, trying to build new worlds. So it makes sense that at some point they've crossed into Spyro's dimension, taken his gems, and Spyro's followed them back. This is kind of important because Spyro pops up in some other games in the Crash series, and now he sort of exists in this same world through these dimensional rifts, I'm going to call them. If he can make it in Twinsanity through the, what's the thing called? The vice versa reversa device? They've got some cooked names in this series, man. It makes sense that he would pop up in other games like Nitro Kart on Game Boy and Ripto's Rampage and Nitro Fueled and stuff. So, yeah, we'll go with that. Now, this game ends with Cortex and Crash beating the evil twins, and then Cortex trying to kill Crash sneakily, but it messes up, and Cortex gets zapped into Crash's brain. So, give me a sec. there's Crash's brain. I'm gonna put that down here. Cortex has been zapped into Crash's brain with a bunch of little crashes, and he's stuck there for the time being. And all these guys are still within the realm of the timeline, but I'm putting this to the side because that's just where he's going to be for now. He's going to be in Crash's brain. I also should, this will come in handy later. I mentioned the time twister earlier. I should have put this down, but I forgot to. The time twister to me, considering you can spend as much time in it as you want, and Cortex and Uka Uka still wouldn't have ruled the world, I think it exists out of time itself, on a different plane, perhaps. That's going to be important later. That's the time twister, that's Crash's brain. Cortex is in Crash's brain, and Twinsanity has just finished. Cortex has been, as I've put it in the script, funnily beamed into Crash's brain. Don't forget, Crash didn't collect the gems in Crash 1. That's super important to this whole thing. Now that Cortex is in Crash's brain, the next game that makes sense, canon-wise, to me, would be Entranced. Because this is the only game that Cortex doesn't appear in. It makes sense that he would be absent from this game. And I know the game's released in different orders that I'm doing this in. This is just how I'm interpreting it and trying to give it sense. You know, you could probably do this with Mario and kill yourself over it because there's so many inconsistencies. This you could sort of try at least. So, Uka Uka and Entropy team up. As we know, they've now introduced new dimensions. So it makes sense that they've met Entrance, who I think is from the 4th dimension. I think they even say that in the game. Could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll say it now.
Ignore me now, please.
So in this game, Entrance takes Coco, brainwashes her, whatever. Crash wins and saves the day. So the game ends with Entropy being sort of knocked out by the good guys, and they take a fun little photo with him. Besides Nitro Kart, Tropy's never seen again, which I also think is kind of important. So, you know, we're going to keep Tropy here for the time being. And Uka Uka ends the game saying, the next time we fight or whatever, you're going to face a real adversary. Keep that in mind too. That's a little important, sort of a throwaway line. Maybe they were building up for a 3rd sequel for the Game Boy, but whatever. Up next, we have Crash Purple. I know. Surprised you, didn't I? Didn't think this game would pop up because it's kind of a mess of a game. It's so good in theory. Crash and Spyro crossing over. On some level, these two games have related to interdimensional travel. This game crosses Crash and Spyro over, the different dimensions colliding. Makes sense to follow up. I'm not sure if Uka Uka's in this game. I don't think he is, so I might even leave him over here with Tropy for now. We have the crew. Cortex by now has broken out of Crash's brain, and instead of working with Uka Uka, as he normally does, because, you know, they've had their little falling out, he's working with Ripto, and, you know, the game goes as it does. It's over. Crash and Spyro beat old mate Cortex and Ripto, and yeah, we can move on to the next game, which is... This was hard to sort of figure out, but because of the breakup between Cortex and Uka Uka, I feel like it's okay to think that Tag Team comes up next. Now the reason for this, you know, we've had Crunch introduced. He was evil in this game. He was confused in this game. You know, he's obviously got some mental issues, abandonment issues maybe. He's crossing sides left and right. He's evil here, he's good here, but he's at a party full of evil guys because he thought it was an actual birthday party. And then he's evil here, but he's actually good, he's just been brainwashed. In this game, he works out, he lifts weights. Yeah, cool. And then we have Tag Team. The crew, you know, Crash, Coco, Cortex, all them. They stumble upon, like they're fighting, as they do. And they stumble upon Von Clutch, who, you know, he's having like a... He's dying. He's dying, and whoever saves the park gets the rights to the land that he owns. The theme park, which Cortex wants to use as a base. Crash and crew don't really want that. Weirdly enough, Aku Aku doesn't really appear in this game, but he is visible in some levels. One of the... I think the first track in the game, he's he's part of one of the racetracks, which is a ride. Funnily enough, I should mention this. Von Clutch mentions to the crew that he knows them, like they're famous, and he has all their video games.
Several renowned evildoer Dr. Neo Periwinkle Cortex. I have all your games. When I see my favorite video heroes, my innards tingle with joy.
This is important. So Aku Aku, he sort of does appear in the game, but him and Uka Uka are not there in person. Von Clutch mentions to Crash, Coco, Cortex, all of them. He has all their games. He says that. And this is quite important to me, because to me, it puts Crash Boom Bang into the canon nicely. This is such a weird game. It doesn't really make sense. The characters sort of act out of character. There's some guy named the Viscount who just has a bunch of money. Now, I think that in the Crash universe, kind of like the Tarantino universe, you know, you have the movies that are set in the Tarantino universe, and then you have the movies that the characters in the universe watch. For example, oh god, I'm gonna get this wrong. I think Pulp Fiction is it's set in the universe, and then a film like Kill Bill is a movie within the universe. I might have mixed that up, but I'm not too sure. But you get what I mean. So in the Crash universe, I think this exists as either a TV show or a video game that was made by Japanese people who were fans of Crash Bandicoot. It's the only Crash game that was made in Japan. All the characters are slightly different. It's kind of like how, you know, The Office will get a remake in the US. Like that. So that's how I put it canonically. It doesn't impact the story. It's a project within the entire thing. And Von Clutch probably loves it because he's a big fan. Okay, back to it. Sorry, I just needed to put that in there because I said I would do every game. You know, Crash and Cortex, whatever, they save him, and then Cortex, they throw a chicken in Cortex's machine, and he pisses off. Now we move on to the next game, which is Nitro Kart. Now, they've been racing heaps at this point. They've just finished tag team racing, and in tag team racing you had to do a bunch of races in order to progress, even though you could just skip them. But they've already been racing, and I think it makes sense for old mate Velo to have been watching this, you know, and maybe he saw CTR as well, or Oxide let him in on how crazy these races are. He's like, oh, you know what, I want to entertain my people, so he beams up the crew into space to race for him. Now, at this point, Cortex and Uka Uka, they were not working together in these two games because they've relatively disbanded, but when Velo brings them up into space, it's likely that he brought Uka Uka as well, wherever he was, in order to give them a bit more of a fighting chance, because, you know, the aliens have the Velo mask, the good guys have Aku Aku. It's only fair for Uka Uka to be there. He even says in pre-race dialogue,
"You will have to race in order to win the Galaxy Circuit and save Earth for us to conquer."
So it makes sense they're sort of forced to work together in this game. All the guys are in this one. Now, canonically, it only makes sense for the good ending to work, because at the end of the evil ending, they sort of get the good guys gets banished into space. So, you know, we're going to follow Crash's journey here. So, Crash, Coco, Crunch, and Aku Aku have just saved the world, I guess. They've exposed Velo for the liar he was, and they're back on Earth. If you pick Crash's side, you don't see Cortex, and if you pick Cortex's side, you don't see Crash in like any of the cutscenes. So, you know, Cortex tried and failed. He got sent back. Whatever. You know, he didn't get the scepter. Crash did, and he gave it back to Velo. The good ending is the one that we're going with. Okay, cool. Entropy, while he does have some times in Nitro Kart, and he is playable, he doesn't appear at all in the story, and considering his connections with Entrance, who appears in Nitro Kart, it's likely that he possibly set the time trials that you face him in before any of this, you know? He could very well still be in captivity with Crash, Crunch, and the crew. Who knows? The last time we saw him, he was in a photo opportunity with the gang. You can race as him in this game when you beat all these time trials. Is that canon though? Was Fake Crash really there? You can play as them, sure, but like, a bit of a stretch. Spyro the Dragon also appears in Crash Nitro Kart on the Game Boy version, working for Entrance. It makes sense. With all the interdimensional stuff, Entrance is an interdimensional being, Spyro appeared in Twinsanity, it's popped up a few times, it makes sense that Entrance could have hypnotized Spyro to race for his team. It's not a stretch, it's not that much of a stretch. What's next? Yeah, you got it right, even though you didn't guess this. It's Crash of the Titans, because yes, even though they have crazy new designs in this game, and the entire, like everything's a little off, it still exists, so we can't really ignore it. Uka and Cortex fully working back together. But, you know, in the plot of this, Cortex, he's sort of starting to take the reins a bit. Not like he's doing a great job of it, but he's up himself, and he's sort of arguing with Uka a lot. There's a lot of infighting. And this peaks with Uka giving Cortex the boot and giving Nina control over their operations. This is just something, you know, it's just part of the lore. I'm just elaborating a little bit. They've been infighting throughout all of this. They stopped working together for a few games. They got forced back to work together. Now Cortex is up himself. That's pretty much all that's happened. Remember how Uka said, you know, the next time we fight, you'll be facing a real adversary. He wasn't in either of these two games. He didn't interact with Crash and crew in this game. He was in this game as a boss, as a big boss. You know, I know they fought him in Twinsanity, but in this he was like monstrous. So there, foreshadowing. Crazy, right? At the end of the game, Crash and Coco destroy the Doominator. Crunch, he just sort of chills, and you know, they save the world again. What's next? What game's next? I know what game's next. I'm just saying, like, whatever. Up next, only makes sense for it to be next. We have Crash Bandicoot Mind Over Mutant. Everyone's still with us except for Entropy, who, you know, he's still vibing up there. Yeah, he very well could have escaped. Maybe he's at the Time Twister. No, it doesn't matter. All we know is that he's not with us right now. You know, Mind Over Mutant happens, Embryo comes back, him and Cortex kick Uka out of power again. Kind of like revenge for Crash of the Titans, really. It's fair enough. The Crash and Aku sort of work with Uka for a bit to take him on. Oh my god. Cortex escapes at the end of Mind Over Mutant. He sort of flies away in space. And then it's, you know, the world is saved, I guess. Or is it? Like, what happens next? Well, you know, we obviously have Crash Bandicoot in Skylanders. Now, you notice I've missed one game from the PS1 era. Don't worry. Don't worry. With Crash and Skylanders, with all this interdimensional crap that's been going on, it's not a stretch. The Crash and Spyro bump into each other. Yeah, they're redesigned, but they're still technically the same characters. Coco doesn't appear in Skylanders. It's likely she was just vibing. Skylanders happens. Cortex is defeated in his little level. He's mad. He's been kicked down so many times. Uka, you know, he doesn't really show up too much in the level, but he's there. He's got a minigame, and you know what? He's not even working with Cortex in the minigame. Sure, Cortex uses him as a weapon, but the minigame, you can play as Cortex, and you have to fight against Uka in like a space thing. I played it, but I don't really remember. Whatever. Now what's next? Because, like, we have the Insane trilogy still. Keep in mind, please, the gems were not all collected. That is super important. I'll keep saying that. The gems were not collected in Crash 1. I gotta keep reminding you. I almost forgot. What happens now? Okay, we have 4 games I haven't spoken about, but I will be right now. This is where things get intense, okay? The heat, the absolute heat between Uka and Aku is always on the rise in this series. Calms down a bit here. Think about their history. Constantly fighting. How are they going to settle it? Only one way. By kidnapping a bunch of their old mates who've sort of gone their separate ways, making them battle it out. Crash Bash. You thought I'd skip this one. You thought I'd pull a Crash Bandicoot Festival, Crash Bandicoot Boom Bang type thing. No, this is real. What ending is real, though? There's a good ending where Uka falls into space. But then there's a bad ending. And in this bad ending, the world is taken over by Uka. It's a really scary cutscene. Aku is shitting himself, telling the kids, the children, run, hide. Uka has won. What now? Okay, I'll tell you what now. So, Here's Crash. Aku Aku, run, children. Crash runs away. He's a dumb idiot. What's he gonna do? Coco is smart. Coco realizes something needs to change. Something has to change. The events that lead up to this can't happen. They can't happen again. Coco goes to the Time Twister, which she has been using. She's learned how to use. She used it in Crash 3. We still haven't seen Entropy for a while. Perhaps she's like gotten information off him on how to properly use this thing. What happens next? Uka Uka has taken over the world. What happens next is a little game called the Insane Trilogy. You ever wonder why Coco was in the, the first and second game playable, even though she didn't even exist in Crash 1? It's because she was smart enough to realize that the only way to stop this would be to collect all the gems in Crash 1 in order to defeat Uka Uka semi-permanently in Crash 3 and get that secret ending. Okay? It still makes sense. The canonical ending for Crash 1, it still makes sense that he beats Cortex. While Coco is off on the side, she's just teleported back. She's back there collecting the gems for Crash, so that when they come back to Warped, they can defeat Uka Uka, send him back in time and space with Cortex, the Entropy. I should have printed that out. That would have been cool. And then they're on the brink of the edge of time and space. So, 3 secret ending, which is now canon. What happens next? Well, you've seen the trailers for it. Cortex states it himself. What happens next is Crash 4 is about time, and I'm trying to avoid spoilers, so all I know is that Cortex has come back from the past with Uka Uka and Trophy. And then, a bunch of, that game's gonna happen. And, Nitro Field, you could pop in a few places. There's a way to justify anything happening in that game, especially with different timelines now, especially with different universes. But for now, I'm just going to say it happens after It's About Time, because Oxide hasn't attacked in this new timeline. Maybe he'll attack after this game. But yeah, that's the timeline. So there's Crash and Aku Aku. The boys have broken out of their thing and started Crash It's About Time. Coco, she helped in the Insane Trilogy, so she's there as well. She's now much more of a main character, it seems. They're pushing that, which I kind of like, a bit more balance. So now we have this new timeline. In fact, here's where the split happens, right there. That's when the new timeline begins. And I'm sure this isn't actually how they're going to justify it. It's just a fun way I've done it. I think it's kind of cool, and I hope you agree too. I think it's something a little different. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, point out any inaccuracies I've made, and then I can maybe do a follow-up and debunk them or admit that I was wrong and rearrange some things. But I think this kind of makes sense, Yeah, thanks for watching. I don't really know how to end videos.